Hi class, let's get going. We've got absolutism to talk about. Our essential question, how did absolutism change the political climate in Europe? Absolutism, traditional assumption of power. So when there is a boy, usually a boy, firstborn boy in a family, he is going to become king. The divine right of kings, God has told these monarchy or these kings that they are to rule, and that is why they do rule. Now, absolute rulers, some characteristics, are not subordinate to assemblies. Nobles were brought under control. Career officials appointed by the king had power of secret police or an army. So all of these are characteristics of absolutism. Now, Jean Bodin and Thomas Hobbes, they were some of the first writers pertaining to absolutism. Authors write about absolutism, create stability. Hobbes wrote Leviathan, pessimistic view of humans. Bishop Bossuet, principal advocate of the divine right of kings. So these authors really pushed this idea of the divine right of kings and how a monarchy can bring stability to an area or a country. Now, the French absolutism, it pertained to three different estates. The first estate was the clergy, made up of 1% of the population, and this was the church, and they had a tremendous amount of power and land and money. The second estate was the nobility, 3 to 4% of the population, so not very much higher. These are the rich of the rich. And then you had the third estate, everybody else, the bourgeoisie, made up about 95% of the population. Now, unfortunately for the bourgeoisie, they're the ones that had to pay all the taxes. So you had the first estate and the second estate not paying taxes and just reaping the rewards of being wealthy, and then you had the third estate paying all the taxes. Not very fair, and that's what got him in trouble in the French Revolution, 1789. Now, Henry IV brings back the class system, and he is the first Bourbon king. So King Henry IV laid the foundation for France to become the strongest European power. He sold nobilities, nobility of the robe, and those people became very loyal to the king, and this made the king very powerful. He increased mercantilism or the state economy. Unfortunately, he was assassinated by a fanatical monk in 1610, and this monk did not like how he had told the people about the Edict Nantes, or sent out the Edict Nantes. So he was Catholic, and he killed the leader for that, King Henry IV. Sorry, kind of losing it there. All right, that left a power void. Marie de Medici was then the Queen of France, and she was the queen for quite a while until King Louis XIII of France could rule. King Louis XIII was a young boy, so she acted as an intermediary. Too young to rule, so Marie Medici ruled with the help of Cardinal Richelieu. Richelieu laid the foundation for absolutism, weakened the nobility, better national government, more efficient, and in a centralized government way. Now, the Peace Alliance, Huguenots lost land and cities. During the 30 Years' War, France supported the Swedes and turned on Spain, eventually forced the Treaty of Westphalia. It was once the French got involved, their huge population was able to end the 30 Years' War and force the Treaty of Westphalia. Now, the King Louis XIV was known as the Sun King. He was personified as the idea of sovereignty as a state resides in the ruler. So he was the idealistic absolutism kind of ruler. This really sums up the sovereignty of the state is in the ruler. So they're one and the same. Now, the divine right of kings, set by King Louis XIV, the longest reign. He reigned in France for 72 years, from when he was 5 years old until he died. He had Versailles built, the huge castle, palace outside of Paris. France became undisputed major power in Europe with such a high population. At least 20% of the people in Europe lived in France. Controlled the nobles with an iron hand. In 1685, issued the Edict of Fontainebleau, which revoked the Edict of Nantes. Many Calvinists fled France. So he was a very staunch Catholic, and he wanted to kick out all the Protestants. Now, during this time in France, mercantilism and wars Mercantilism, remember, is a favorable balance of trade in your favor of your country, and bullionism is the buildup of gold. So both of these things were happening in France. Colbert's policy to help France, and had many of these, achieved many of these. France leading up to the industrial country population. France fought many wars during Louis XIV's reign that proved to be very costly. So these wars, which France won a lot of, but they borrowed a lot of money, and this hurt France quite a bit. The downfall of future monarchy. So during this time, since the wars drained so much money, the French economy dropped, 20% of the population died, a huge debt on the Third Estate. Once again, that Third Estate not too happy, and sows the seeds for French Revolution in the next century. All right, now the Spanish Empire at this time, Charles V, Philip II, led absolutism in Spain. The decline of the Spanish power was brought about by the loss of the Moors and Jews in the Spanish Inquisition. Remember the Spanish Inquisition, they kicked these people out or they killed them, so they lost a lot of the middle class. Colony trade was down 60% from 1610 to 1660. The Spanish treasury, bankrupt, they just blew all their money. Taxes hit peasants hard. Now also during this time, at the beginning of this time, Spanish Armada was defeated in 1588 against England, and then they lost the 30 Years' War. So the combination of those two things was devastating to Spain. The Spanish Empire continued to decline and never regained its power or wealth. So when they sent out the conquistadors in the 1400s and early 1500s, they brought back so much money and so much power that the Spanish were at their height, but then they just lost it all. The Baroque period was a period of Catholic countries teaching the concrete and emotional way to demonstrate the glory and power of the Catholic Church, especially in art. And the Baroque period was a movement that can be seen emphasizing grandeur, emotion, movement, reflected image, power, absolute rulers of the Catholic Church. Artists such as Bernini, Rubens, Rembrandt, Vermeer. The Palace of Versailles is a perfect example of Baroque art where it's just very grandiose. The art is very emotional. Here's a few works. I've got Bernini's David, and we've seen a few of the other Davids in the past. This one is showing actual motion. It looks like he just chucked a rock at Goliath. So he's in motion. So that's characteristics of the Baroque period. You have Rembrandt's The Anatomy, and then over here you've got Vermeer, the lady with the jug of water. So make sure and take good notes. History's no mystery.